Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on our judicial panel on how to choose wisely and how to get to know judicial candidates that are running in your community. My name is Camille Wimbish and I'm joined by Mia Lewis. And we are recording a special session here today to really just hone in on what are the resources that you need to have so that you can get to know your judges. And we're excited to share this version with you.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you.
And this has been sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, Common Cause Ohio, and the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance, and the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. So lots of great organizations working together to really help promote voter education around judges. Again, here are smiling faces. I'm with an organization called Ohio Voice, and Mia is with Common Cause Ohio. We're based in Columbus. And the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance was founded around in 2015 with Ohio Voice, Common Cause Ohio, the Dayton NAACP, Greater Cleveland congregations, and the Ohio Environmental Council, who are all sort of coming together to figure out what types of judicial reforms we could advance here in Ohio. What is fair courts, you may be wondering? Well, our vision is that we believe in a court system that exemplifies, protects equity, fairness, and justice for all. And we realize that those are some really lofty ideals, and that our country was really not set up to provide equity and fairness for all people. It was really started to create those values really for sort of, privileged white men with property. And as our country has evolved, we really need to sort of dig a little bit deeper and make sure that we have a really representative and inclusive democracy. And so that's what we're working for. Mia, what are we going to be talking about today?
So we are going to talk about what's at stake on the November ballot, specifically regarding our judicial elections. And then we want to give you some tools for getting to know your judicial candidates and figuring out what makes a good judge. So we're going to start by talking about what's at stake for the November election coming up, November 2020. So Ohio voters in all counties are going to be electing judges this November, including county and common pleas courts. All 12 districts of the Ohio Court of Appeals will have judicial elections, and there are 2 open seats on the Supreme Court of Ohio. So in the even years, we're electing the county and common pleas courts, and in the odd years, we're electing the municipal seats. The municipal judges will be on the ballot. So we have a kind of a funny thing in Ohio. It's a pretty unusual, which is that we have these partisan primaries where judges from candidates who are from the same party run against each other with a party label. So you might have a couple of candidates running to be the Democratic judge over here and the Republican judge over there. But once those candidates win or in the primary, when they go to the general election, there's no party label. So once you go into the ballot booth and you go to vote in November, you're going to see a bunch of names for judge, but they will not have any party label, party identification. Sometimes that's what people use to kind of figure out, if they're going to vote for them or not. So we have to do a little more work here in Ohio. We don't have that shortcut. So that's why we want to give you some more tools.
So Ohio Supreme Court is the highest level of court. There's essentially 3 levels of courts. There's the common pleas and municipal county courts. And then the next level would be the appellate courts. And then the highest level is the Supreme Court. And this year we expect 2 high-profile Supreme Court seats. Essentially, Justice Kennedy and Justice French will be running to retain their seats. And this election has the opportunity to actually flip the power dynamics. Right now, there's 5-2 Republican majority. And so we expect there to be tons of money really flooding into Ohio around the Supreme Court races. So you should be hearing lots more about those. So as I mentioned, Justice Judith French is going to be running to retain her seat, and her challenger is going to be Jennifer Brunner. So Jennifer Brunner will be the Democrat, and Judith French will be the Republican. However, as Mia said, there will not be party identifying information on that ballot in November. So it's really going to be up to voters to either have party slate cards or do their research in advance. Otherwise, they'll be sort of left to figure out just by name. Unfortunately, a lot of folks sort of just end up defaulting to, I'm going to pick someone with a name that seems familiar, or maybe the Irish name that sounds like a good judicial name. And so we're really hoping that folks will do their research this year and really get to know the judges on the ballot. So the other race that will be up will be Justice Sharon Kennedy, the Republican, who's going to go up against John O'Donnell, the Democrat, although, again, it's going to say nonpartisan on your ballot. And so those, essentially every 2 years, there'll be 2 seats that will be up on the Supreme Court. And so those are the seats that are up this year. Mia, can you tell us why the Supreme Court cases and what types of cases, things that they hear, and why it's important?
Yeah, so some very, very important cases come up before the Ohio Supreme Court, of course, and these are some recent ones. There's been a death penalty case which reaffirmed Ohio's death penalty criteria as constitutional. There's been a ruling on citizens' initiatives. Some people thought it was too bad during COVID that people did not have the opportunity to go out and collect signatures, and the Ohio Supreme Court said, well, that's the way it goes. You can't gather online, and you can't have an extension. That was a very important ruling. And there was also a ruling about open government. It said that the court ordered that a governmental body cannot conduct public business by way of a secret ballot. So these are some of the issues that have recently come up, and then some that are coming up soon: guns in schools, environmental safety, redistricting. Redistricting, of course, the Supreme Court basically said, even if there's gerrymandering, there's nothing really that we as the Supreme Court can do about it, unfortunately. So they kind of kicked that back down to the state courts. And so next year, after the census next year, the Ohio legislature will be tasked with redrawing our congressional and Ohio legislative districts. And those maps are likely to be challenged, and the challenge will be in the Ohio Supreme Court. So the justices that we elect this November will ultimately have a huge role in deciding whether we have fair courts in Ohio or not. So that's another reason that these are particularly important races.
All right, so on to our next section in terms of what actually makes a good judge.
We have this wonderful blank screen for you to think about that for a minute. What would make a good judge? What qualities? So we just had a presentation recently, and we asked this question, and we had a little interactive tool, and people could enter in on their phones the answer to that question, and then it populates this big word cloud. And this is what came out. It's kind of fun. You can watch it move as people enter information, and the bigger words are the ones that people entered more often. So I think fairness kind of won out there as the quality that people most care about in a judge. A judge cannot be a good judge if they are not fair. And so many other characteristics as well.
Yeah, I see compassion and compassionate.
Yeah.
So if we combine those, I bet that would rise to the top as well.
Absolutely.
Honesty are also important.
And so, so many interesting qualities like self-knowledge, self-awareness, having a good temperament, being a good listener. A mensch. So a woman, somebody said. So all kinds of different things that people think are important qualities for judges. And we put together some that we thought about as well.
So we are, in our opinion, a good judge is not influenced by money. A good judge is familiar with community concerns and issues, who really understands, the people who are coming before them in the court. Of course, someone who applies the law fairly and without bias, someone who's knowledgeable, who has experience, someone who understands that there are problems with access to justice and bias, and is actively working to overcome those shortcomings. And of course, someone who has a vision of courts that goes beyond just, being tough on crime and seeking to punish people, but is really looking for how we can sort of transform ourselves and to be better versions of ourselves.
The other flip side of that, of course, is that there are things that make bad judges. A judge who's biased cannot be a good judge. A judge who lacks empathy cannot be a good judge, or just doesn't even have any ability to understand that people have a different experience, or, and in Ohio, we also have to worry about the influence of money, because it's not in every state that judges are elected. Sometimes they're appointed. But in Ohio, our state judges are all elected, and that means that they have campaign contributions, and that may influence them in some way. And so that obviously would make a bad judge someone who is influenced by the power of the folks that are contributing to their campaigns.
And we also wanted to point out, I know, particularly in this moment in time when we're really focusing on the Black Lives Matter movement, to really uplift some of the problems with bias in our justice system, as well as in all aspects of our society. And so these stats here really underscore the fact that Black and brown people are really over-policed. They face tougher sentencing. They have less favorable outcomes in drug courts and other alternative dispute resolution systems. And of course, in terms of the incarceration rates of Black and brown people are really staggering. And so our justice system has a lot of work to do in order to really root out some of these systemic biases, and to figure out how we can really do better by our communities.
So when you think about, okay, so we have all these qualities that we talked about, being a good judge, not being influenced by money, all of these things, and being a bad judge. And then you're trying to figure out, well, how can I find out, if I'm looking at a judicial candidate, what kinds of questions can I ask them that will help reveal whether they are, according to my beliefs, a good judge. So just a heads up, there are actually some kinds of questions that you cannot ask a judicial candidate. You can't ask them to say how they're going to rule on something. You can't ask them just, how do you feel about abortion, or, broad political or policy questions like that. But you can find very useful and effective and creative ways to ask questions that are allowed, that will reveal a lot to you about the judge and give you the information that you need to know in order to say whether you think that person should be making decisions and putting people, and ruling over people's lives.
So in our longer version of this presentation that we did, when we had interactive folks, we asked people what questions would they want to ask judicial candidates. And we got some really illuminating responses. A lot of it, as we said, it comes down to sort of being creative in terms of how can you go around the rules so that you can find out really what is in the judge's heart and mind, the candidates. And so we suggest some things like asking about community involvement. What organization affiliations do they have, or do they want to put out there for public consumption? That can tell you a lot about, what boards they serve on, what is their volunteer experience, who do they spend time with, and who do they want to be seen as endorsing them. A lot of nonprofits will actually do endorsements. So if your issue is reproductive choice, you can go to Planned Parenthood and see what whether that candidate has an endorsement. And we also suggest you should be asking about how judicial candidates may deal with bias. Are they willing to acknowledge that bias exists, and how do they try to address it? How would they address it in their courtroom? Another idea is to ask about how have they just dealt with an ethical dilemma. It can sort of highlight what they view as problems, how they think through solutions, and can really help you get a little more discernment.
Hello, Kitty. So in a way, you're kind of in a way you can ask about their biography. What have they done in their lives? What's been important to them? And if they're talking about that involvement with that community organization and that partnership they made with somebody who was very different from them, maybe you're getting a sense of them as an empathetic person or someone with a wider worldview. So think about biography. Think about getting them to think about a time when, there wasn't really a right answer. What did they do? How did they solve that problem? So there's lots of interesting questions you can kind of craft in order to get the answers that you want. And we have a lot of great sample questions. And if you go to that link there, you can see the handout that we put together. Actually, that's from the League of Women Voters, with additional questions that will help really tease out the kinds of information you need to know about your judicial candidates.
So yeah, these are some more of categories of questions you might think about in terms of background. What life experience do they bring to the bench? We're all people outside of our jobs, and who are their role models? What communities and what are they passionate about can tell you a little bit more about who they are. Experience. And this can be legal experience, it can be other work experience. I think it's really important that we have people who don't just come from one walk of life, who didn't just go to a Ivy League law school and then they spent their whole life living in one place and they only worked in the private sector. But having a diverse range of people who worked in the public sector, people who work in nonprofits, maybe social workers or police officers, people who really have lived their life and can take from those experiences valuable lessons that can help serve them on the court. And then there's legal philosophy. That means sort of to what extent do they think they should be deferring to the legislature, and when is it okay or proper, if at all, to divert from precedent, from the existing law that's before them. And what can the court do to actually make sure that there is justice for all? So those are all sort of types of legal philosophy questions that are definitely permissible.
More important questions. Ethics. How will they maintain their impartiality and guard against undue influence? I think that judges really have a hard time. It's hard for them to see that maybe that might be a problem, but I think confronting them directly and asking, how are you going to, it's difficult to go against somebody who's done you a favor. Think of a social situation where someone you're kind of indebted to, you have to call them out in some way. That would be difficult. So just calling their attention to it and seeing if they've thought about it and it's something that they're willing to acknowledge, that's really important. Temperament is incredibly important. This may be a question that you ask them, but you may also want to try to learn a little bit about how they've handled things in the past. Are there any news articles about them? Have they been involved in the courts themselves? That kind of thing. Reform ideas. I think that it's very important to know that the people who are running to be judge are thinking about the system. They're not just trying to go and make it carry on as it is, but they're thinking, how are we going to make this better? Even just in terms of efficiency, how are they going to run their docket? How are they going to make sure that people are being treated fairly? We want to know that they've been thinking about these issues.
And then we've created a few questions that were not originally on the League of Women Voters handout, but just some questions to help think through racial disparities that exist in terms of asking folks, you know, what do they believe are the causes for the high rates of minority incarcerations, and whether there's anything that courts can do to address this issue. I think that's a really key question in light of the huge mass incarceration problem that we have before us. What about unconscious bias, and how does this play out in jury selection? Is there anything we can do about that? Many states are tackling this issue. Should this be something that we take on here in Ohio? What about the making sure that the jurors actually reflect a cross-section of the community? You know, we tend to have a jury pool that if they're of one race and the defendant is another race, then there can be a bias in terms of assuming that that person is more likely to have done something wrong. And so, you know, if we have a jury pool that doesn't actually look like the community, can they understand that where the defendant is coming from? Can they give the defendant the benefit of the doubt that they're entitled to under the law? And then, of course, what can the courts do, you know, systemically to address racial disparities, whether it's plea bargains, overcharging, bail determination, sentencing? All of the data that we have is really showing that white folks end up getting a better shake than Black and brown folks. And so what can really be done about that? I know the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice is really trying to take this on as a key initiative in the next 2 years, is to really create a system where we have uniform data that really tells us whether or not there is of course, we think on a federal level that there are racial disparities, but how is this playing out here in Ohio? So that's a project that we can hopefully champion and see play out in real life.
Because I think that a lot of judges would say, no, I'm not biased, I'm really not biased. But if they're confronted with the data to show, well, this is the sentence you gave to this person. I mean, if you actually collect the data, that will really give a lot of information and kind of hold a mirror up to people to see what's actually happening.
Yeah, and I think it's important to improve, you know, public confidence. Right now, public confidence has really been shaken in a lot of our democratic institutions. And so if we get the data out there, we can see, you know, to what extent this is a problem. And then if we don't know what the problem is, if we can't see the problem, if we can't put metrics on the problem, then we can't really figure out how we're doing in addressing the problem. Mm-hmm. So that'll be key.
So that's a lot of ideas about the kind of questions that you can ask judicial candidates. There are other sources of information about candidates. So we're kind of assuming, when we're talking about asking them questions, we're assuming that you go to a forum and you have an opportunity to ask a question, or you can interact with their campaign and email questions or something like that. But there's also information out there for you to gather already about judicial candidates. And this website, judicialvotescount.org, is the first Ohio statewide judicial education website. And what it does is it lists all the races by county, and it sends questionnaires to the candidates, and it asks them to answer certain questions, so that if both candidates have filled out the questionnaire, you can compare them and you can see, you know, what they believe, what their answer is to this question, and compare it to the other candidate. Now, of course, they may not fill out the questionnaire, but that's kind of an answer in itself. So this is an important website. Please share this information with your friends, judicialvotescount.org. And that's a way for you to get to know the folks that are running for judge in your county. And it'll include the higher up races as well.
So in addition to Judicial Votes Count, there are many other resources that you could go to learn more about the judges that are running. Bar association ratings is one place where members of the legal community are asked to weigh in on the judges that they see in the courtroom to really gauge their experience and their temperament. Of course, if you have minority bar associations in your area, I would check those too, to sort of keep in mind that there are some critiques of bar association ratings that they may not be sort of a diverse representative sample of everyone, but it does give you a sort of a baseline for evaluating some of the candidates. Again, look at endorsements. Check out the Sierra Club or whatever your community group of interest is, and see whether they've endorsed. A lot of times those endorsements will be provided in the questionnaires on Judicial Votes Counts, or you can find them on if you're looking at your state party slate card, that would be listed as well. Be sure to check out social media. Check out their Facebook page or their Twitter page and see whether or not there's something in there that speaks to you or makes you question their temperament. There can be a lot of information or videos or things so that you can sort of get to know the candidate on a more personal level beyond just their name. Take a moment and Google them. See what pops up. You may be surprised what you learned with a simple Google search in terms of headlines of things in the news, or you may find cases that they were a part of.
Or for example, sometimes a judge may actually have been sanctioned. There are cases where there's a judge who may be running who's had a lot of trouble and has gotten into trouble on the bench, but they're obviously not going to be advertising that themselves. But if you Google them, you may actually find out some of those controversies that they've been involved in.
For sure. Or just statements that they've issued that may just seem at odds with your personal belief system. Judicial forums. There's going to be some coming up this fall. Check for them in your community. But that's a perfect opportunity for you to be able to ask questions, whether online or if in the future when we're all free of COVID, when we can get back to in-person events, when they're doing more mix and mingle opportunities with judges.
Judicial opinions. If the candidate is already a sitting judge, they will have opinions. You might actually want to go and look and see what some of those opinions were, and see if you agree with the decisions that they made. Campaign contributions. You can find out who's been contributing to their campaigns. That may be very useful information. You may find, let's say you have two candidates and there's the chamber and this and the Buckeye Rifle Association or whatever it is has been giving to this candidate, and this other, the Sierra Club's been giving to the other candidate. That's going to give you some big flags about, where those candidates stand on certain issues. There may be a court watch organization in your area that's been watching some of the cases of that judge. And
even an opportunity for you to go, and if you have time to sit in on some of the court hearings, that can be really illustrative of their demeanor, just how their courtroom runs. So you get a sense of whether you feel like they're doing a good job or not.
Yep. And then, of course, vote411.org is always great source for information. And your local newspaper may have information about candidates as well, or even op-eds or editorials. And I was going to add to this as well, the candidate's own website, and the candidate may have like a campaign Facebook page, and that'll be at least, they'll share their endorsements there, and they may also have listings of like events, and at this time it may be like a Zoom get together. So checking out those websites as well, and the Facebook pages will be useful just to find out where you can actually interact with the judge or the candidate.
All right, so to wrap up, how can you get involved? Well, of course, it's super important that you help us share why it's important to vote for judicial candidates. Unfortunately, a lot of people will vote at the top of the ticket, and then they may just decide not to bother with the candidates at the bottom. And as we have talked about it today, judges have a really important role in our community, and they decide important issues to individuals as well as to the community at large. And so it's so important that we take the opportunity that we have when we are empowered to elect our judges to actually make informed decisions. And so Judicial Votes Count is one of the websites we really want to make sure that we're sharing with folks so that they can see the local judges that are running in our community. Take some time, if you have it, to get to know the judges running by asking questions if they're doing forums or debates or candidate presentations at various events. Really try to make a personal connection, or at least do some additional research on the candidate beyond just what's on their yard sign or campaign flyer. Suggest an organization that could benefit from a Fair Courts presentation. We are available. We have the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance has a speakers bureau of trained folks who are happy to come speak to your organization. If you're doing you know, a monthly meeting, we can be slotted in to come talk to your folks about why judges matter and what's coming up on the election. So get in touch with us if you're interested in having a type of presentation. And of course, register to vote and vote in every election.
And I'm just going to add, I mean, I think people feel, the thing that makes people not vote for a judge, I mean, they get down to the end of the ballot and they don't recognize the names, you know, some people, and it's embarrassing, particularly if you care about voting and you're a kind of dedicated, you know, you think you care about your civic responsibility, and you get to these candidates and you don't know them. So that's why it's so important to just try to learn about those judges so you feel confident when you go into the ballot booth, so that you can actually you know, make those decisions. You've already made your decision and you're just checking them off. And remind your friends, tell your friends how important it is to get to know those judges, to think about the candidates, and to make sure to vote all the way down the ballot. Feel confident.
So there's a couple more places where you can get more information. Of course, Judicial Votes Count, Vote 411 is the League of Women Voters site. The Vote 411 page can actually give you you can put in your address, and it will create a sample ballot so that you will have a preview of what would be on your ballot, and you can get information about the candidates right there. Ballot PD and Vote Smart additionally will have candidate information. When it comes to learning more about the courts, you can go to the Supreme Court website. They will give you more information about how courts are structured and what they do. Judicial Votes Count, judgeforyourself.com is something that is specific to Cleveland area folks. So you can see the judges that are running up in Cleveland, as well as You Be the Judge at summitcounty.com for folks up in Akron. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper into campaign contributions, Common Cause Ohio can help get you connected, as well as the Ohio Secretary of State maintains all of the campaign contribution information.
And another place to see your sample ballot is actually the Secretary of State's website. If you go to voteohio.gov, you can put in your information and you can get specific information about what will be on your ballot, including all the folks running for judge. And you don't have to wait. You can actually request your absentee ballot today. Isn't that right, Mia? That's right. You sure can. And it's important too, because if everybody requests right at the end, there'll be a big surge, and that'll be really hard for the boards of elections to process that all together. So we want to flatten that ballot request curve and make sure that the boards of elections can get the ballots out to everybody on time. And you know, you can also track your ballot. That's another thing you can do if you go to voteohio.gov, and make sure when you send in your ballot that it's arrived and that it's going to be counted. Well, that wraps us up for today. If you would like to go online and let us know what you think of the presentation and whether it was helpful, that will help us improve future presentations. And otherwise, if you have any additional questions, or again would like to you know, talk to us about getting a Fair Courts presentation for your group or community organization, our contact information is right there. Thank you so much, guys. We are very excited that you want to know about voting for judges and participating in our democracy.
Please share this with your friends. Take care.
Thank you.